Hello, my beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings. And yes, those are birds you are hearing in the background. As I record this, it is early morning, but now that we are well into spring, the sun is already up and the birds are singing in the background. So a little lovely ambiance for you as we move forward with this episode. So this podcast is designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I offer one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you come into a beautiful space where you can rest and replenish and fall asleep if that is your desire. This podcast is a blend of two of my favorite forms of self-care, sleep podcasts and connecting with the angels, both of which I do just about every single day. So my love for sleep podcasts started somewhere around 2015 when I found my way to the Sleep With Me podcast by Andrew Ackerman. I think I came across it when I was looking at some podcast charts and I was intrigued by the title. And then I was even more intrigued when the show description said it's a podcast to help you fall asleep. And I wonder, how does he do that? And what I came to discover, it is the art of sharing bedtime stories and rambling. And he says on his show, he speaks to you in soft, dulcet tones, which is such a lovely description. And at the time that I was listening to his podcast, he was producing 3-hour-long episodes each week, which is an astounding amount of content. And he had different kinds of episodes. In some, he shared original stories that he was writing. In others, he did personal essays where he shared snippets of his life and everything in between. And I was absolutely enchanted, and I became a regular listener. And then a couple years ago, I discovered some other sleep podcasts that I fell in love with, including Sleepy by Otis Gray, Get Sleepy, and The Sleepy Bookshelf. And there are many others out there. And I love the genre so much. I was really guided to create this podcast to add to the inventory of options that are out there. And I just followed the line of creativity and inspiration, not even thinking for a moment that my Illuminating Souls audience, many of them had never listened to podcasts before, and almost none of them knew what a sleep podcast was. So that's been an interesting learning curve for all of us. But here we are now. So to share with you a little bit about my suggestions on how to use this as a sleep podcast is, first of all, to get cozy in your sleeping position, whatever that is. I love crawling in bed at the end of the day. And so part of my ritual is to pull all the covers up just right and I use wired earphones, and I pick my episode. And I also use a sleep timer so that the app will turn off at the end of the episode. I typically listen to episodes that are about an hour long, so I have plenty of time to fall asleep. That's my preference, and that's why these episodes are almost an hour long. And then I turn the volume down lower than I would if I were listening to an audiobook. And then I let myself just drift off. So that's my recommendation. It may take a few tries, may take a few nights before you get used to this. My hope is this podcast will become a sacred and loving companion for you, something you can lean into. In every episode, I share the angels with you, the spiritual wisdom, and then we move into story time where I read to you or I tell you stories from my own life, and I speak to you in these soft, soothing tones, and there will be no unexpected loud noises, and it's meant to be rambling, maybe even a little bit boring, because the concept is to give space for your consciousness to just drift off. And then I also say hello to those of you who love listening during the daytime. And I get to keep you company as you go about your day or evening. So however you are guided to listen to this podcast, I am grateful you are here. Truly, it is a blessing to support you in your life and on your journey. So I invite you to take a nice deep breath in and release, just letting go of whatever came before this moment, allowing yourself to be present to the love the angels are shining upon you now. As I record this, it is the beginnings of a beautiful day. The sun is glinting off the leaves of the trees in my neighbor's yard, and the sky is a beautiful shade of blue, and yet it's early enough that the world around me is still quiet, with the exception of the morning birds. And I love this time of day. I've shared with you before that my father was always someone who went to bed very early and woke up in the early morning. And he said he loved the quiet of the early morning. And when I was younger, I never understood that because I was the typical teenager, and then in my 20s and 30s, I loved the luxury of sleeping late. I would stay up late. I would go out with friends late. And so sleeping till 10 or 11 a.m. just felt like a luxury. And wouldn't you know, as I have gotten older, I have inherited my father's circadian rhythm. And I am almost always in bed by 8 o'clock. I can't even tell you the last time I stayed up until 10, and I'm usually awake by 4. I don't get out of bed that early. I love just hanging out in bed, not needing to get up. But I'm almost always out of bed by 6. And so I'm on this rhythm now, and so sleep podcasts really help me stay in a rhythm that feels really good for me and my body. So my hope for you is that this podcast serves you well, and that it helps you come into a rhythm that feels really good for you. And I feel the love of the angels streaming in as I speak these words. And there is so much love and support here for you right now. I'm taking a deep breath in on that because the energy flow is so beautiful and powerful right now. So I'm going to call the angels in even though they are already here. But this way, through this ritual, you know they are here as well. So beautiful angels on high, I rejoice in our time together. And I thank you for the invitation to join you in sacred circle right now with each of our beloveds listening to this message. And angels, I ask that you continue bringing forward waves of love, waves of healing, waves of upliftment. And I am so grateful for this time with you. And so, dear ones, just take some nice deep breaths in and visualize, imagine, allow it to be so, that the space you are in is being filled with a soft pink light that represents divine love that has been calibrated just for you. Allow your angels' love to help ease anything that feels like a burden to you, clearing your energy field of anything that does not belong to you. And take a deep breath in. And as I bring the angels forward, it feels as if they are helping to clear your throat chakra. So sometimes our throat chakras can feel a little stuck because perhaps we do not feel as if we have a place to share our voice or our authentic truths. So the angels right now are bringing healing and light to your throat chakra, clearing away any tightness you might feel in that area, and letting you know that you have a beautiful voice and you have within you powerful wisdom and insight and stories to share. There's a beautiful adage that I believe I first heard from Abraham Hicks, and my guides often speak of it. And it says that a messenger can only deliver a message to someone who is a vibrational match to the message. And I think this is such powerful wisdom because often in life, we try to share our messages with those who cannot hear us, those who are not a vibrational match to what we share. And this can cause us to doubt the power of our voice. But your wisdom and your voice, your insight and your stories, they are beautiful and powerful, and those who are a vibrational match with you and what you share will rejoice in the opportunity to receive that which you seek to share. This is an important pearl of wisdom. And so if anywhere you are feeling that your voice has been stymied or silenced or not valued, all it means is that you have not yet found your audience and your people and your beloveds and your soul family who will welcome you with open arms and feel so blessed to be with you. So just breathe and allow the angels to bring healing to your throat chakra, to your voice. Taking a deep breath in and just releasing. This is such an important reminder for us all. Listen, I know in my life the work that I do is a bit strange, and I'm totally good with that. And I know that my messages and the words that I share and the concepts that I share will not be everyone's cup of tea. But I don't worry about that, because my joy comes in sharing with you and others who are grateful and excited and welcoming of what I have to share. A messenger can only deliver a message to someone who's a vibrational match to the message. It's also why there is such polarization right now in this world, because so many of the messages that are being amplified are resonating with some, and for many of us have zero resonance at all. But that does not mean that you should not use your voice. You have permission to curate places where you feel welcome and safe and loved and supported, where you can speak your truth, where you can share your authentic voice. And if you do not know where those places are, or they do not yet exist in your life, we can ask the angels to help cultivate and co-create these spaces for you. You are not alone. You're not alone in how you feel. You're not alone in how you are experiencing the world. If you are one who feels deeply in your heart, you are most certainly not alone, because there are many of us here on the planet with you. So take a deep breath in and allow your angels to help bring to you the essence of divine home, allowing it to ripple here on earth, to make it easier for you to attract those people and circumstances that will rejoice in the opportunity to travel this journey with you, to bring in that beautiful essence of home for you. And take a deep breath in. You know, I have been facilitating a lovely 6-week class called Your Magical Mystical Path. And in one of the weeks, we were talking about who have you always been and what is important to you. And one of the things that I wrote down, and this is something I have contemplated before, is that I have always needed to belong. I do my best when I belong somewhere. So I was blessed for much of my life. I felt like I belonged with my parents. I was someone who grew up with a very solid foundation of love. I know not everybody gets that, but I got to have it, and I feel so blessed because of it. I then had groups of friends where I felt like I belonged. I've had spiritual community where I feel like I belong. I'm married to my best friend, and I feel like I belong with him. I absolutely feel like I belong with our Illuminating Souls family, and my hope is you feel like you belong here as well. So that's what I have been contemplating, is this deep need within myself to feel like I belong and to know that I have a place in the world, and that I have found others who can see me and appreciate me, not from a narcissistic way where everyone's, telling me how awesome I am, but people who can really hold space for me. And I affirm this for you, that you are calling to you others who see you and who appreciate you and who can hold a big, beautiful space for all that you are. And there is most certainly a place for you here, right now. That I am sending you love, and the angels are sending you love, and we so deeply appreciate the gift of you. So I invite you to take a nice deep breath in and receive this love. Receive this acknowledgement, because you are precious in this universe, and we are so grateful for the gift of you. So, my beautiful friend, I invite you to cozy on up and snuggle on in. And while you rest, your angels will be with you, and they will take good care of you. And I'm going to read to you and share some stories with you. So for story time tonight, we're going to be talking about the telephone. And it's so interesting. I just put two and two together. When I'm recording the first part of the podcast episode, I don't really know what's going to come through. And the angels came through so clearly about clearing our throat chakras and using our authentic voices. And now I'm going to be talking about the telephone, which is all about vocal communication. And I didn't put two and two together until just now. So I just need to high five the angels and say, that's really good. Way to go, angels. Way to make the first part of the episode relevant to what we're going to talk about here. So I'll tell you what is inspiring this theme. A few months ago, Wes and I went to a used book sale at one of the libraries down in the San Jose area. And it's a very popular sale. I think they have it once a month or something. And it was really crowded, and they only let a certain number of people into the venue at a time. It almost had that Black Friday sale kind of energy. And so I was very focused on what I was looking for. I look for materials for the podcast. So old cookbooks, old publications that I can read to you or that might be interesting for us to explore together. And my husband and I got in on the second or third wave. And there were all these people clustered together, and there was a basket of old publications. And so when I got up to the basket, when the other people were done with the basket, I just started pulling things out and handing them to my husband. I'm like, let's just take them all. And we weeded through them. But one of the ones that I picked up was a publication from the 40s, I think, like right around the late 40s, called The Magic of Communication, all about the telephone. And it was produced by one of the Bell companies. So it's really interesting. It's a time capsule of where we were in terms of telephone communication back then. And so that is what is inspiring this episode. So I first thought I would talk to you about my history with telephones because in all likelihood it will be very similar to your history with telephones. So I'm 60, almost 61. So I was born in 1962. And we always had a telephone growing up. Our telephone was a wall-mounted rotary phone in the beginning part of my life. It was in our hallway. As I recall, it was yellow. It had a long cord, so you could go into my parents' bedroom, which was right next door to it, if you wanted a little bit of privacy or wanted to sit down, or you could sit on the couch, which was just a few feet away. But there was really no such thing as privacy unless you went into my parents' room and closed the door. My parents had the same phone number my entire life. In the early days, phone numbers started with 2 letters that represented the numbers. So our phone number started with Orchard 6, which was OR6, 676. So forever it was Orchard 6. And that meant that it was a Skokie exchange. It was one of those rotary dial phones because push button phones had not been popularized yet. So you had to drag the dial all the way around, especially if there were a lot of zeros. Sometimes you would use the tip of a pencil or a pen to dial the phone. In the beginning, there was no such thing as call waiting. So if the phone was busy, you just kept trying until it wasn't. For the longest time, we just had the one phone in the house. And then at some point, we converted to push button, which was great. And then at some point, there was call waiting. Caller ID would still be a ways off. I didn't have access to my first answering machine until 1985 when I moved to California, to Los Angeles, and my roommate had one. It was one of those big, bulky answering machines that had the tape in it. But I thought that was so cool that we had an answering machine because we hadn't had one before. My first experience with a mobile phone or cell phone was in the late 1980s when I was working for Michael Nesmith. And he had one which was the size of a brick. It had to be carried in this big case. But I thought that it was super cool. And then somewhere, I don't remember when, my cousin Susie probably remembers better than I do, but somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s, we went together to a department store, Robinson's May, which then became, I don't know, maybe it was Robinson's at the time, and then became Robinson's May, and then became Macy's, but it was some variation of Robinson's at the time. And we signed up for cell phones together. So at the time, cell phones were very expensive, and you got very few minutes. So most of us, we still had landlines at home. And for the landlines, you would have a separate carrier for local calls and a different carrier for long distance. And at the time, MCI was one of the long-distance carriers, and they had this great deal where you could talk to people, I think it was after 7 p.m. and before 6 a.m., something like that, for 5 cents a minute, which was a really good deal back then. And so I had my cell phone, but I only used it for emergencies. But I do remember the first time I was at the mall. I was at the Century City Mall, and I thought it was so cool that I had this cell phone and I could sit outside, and I called my mom. I'm like, Mom, I'm on a cell phone at the mall. I was so delighted. but I can only talk for like 2 minutes because I've got 20 minutes, and if I go over it, it's going to cost me a lot of money. So I'll call you later, okay? I love you, bye. Was like the extent of the phone call back then. And so my cell phone was really just for emergencies, which back in the day meant if a friend was running late or I was running late, I don't mean like calling the police. I mean like I could call my cousin and go, Bleadon, I'm late. I'll be there in 20 minutes. That kind of emergency typically was what I meant. And so I had the landline at home, which at that point had an answering machine. And then I had my emergency only cell phone because I didn't want to go over 20 minutes. And back then, there was really no caller ID. And most people would call you on your landline. So back in the day, in my late 20s and early 30s, if I was waiting for a call from a guy, because, back then those were things that we did, I would wait at home because I wouldn't want to miss the call. And then I wouldn't pick up right away. I would pick up on like the fourth ring, and then I would answer like, oh my God, hello, oh my God, I was just so busy. I wasn't waiting at home at all. I just ran in the door. You'd make up all these stories to make it sound like you're super busy and you're not at all waiting at home for somebody to call. So young people will not understand that weird way of thinking at all, probably to their benefit. And, of course, then I have lived through the advent of the iPhone and cell phones becoming our only way that we use telephones anymore. My husband and I do have, it's not even a landline anymore, it's through Comcast, but we do have a regular phone in the house, but everything is done on our iPhones these days. So it's so interesting to have lived through this evolution of telephones and how we use them. These days, I wonder, is it okay to just call somebody out of the blue? Are we allowed to do that now? Which it used to be, that's all we would ever do. You just pick up the phone and call someone. These days, it's more like you text them, hey, can you talk? Can I call you? So, it's so interesting how it's evolved, our relationship with telephones. And this whole texting thing, I remember the first time I ever saw someone texting, I was working for Nielsen and we were doing some international meetings, and one of my colleagues was in from London, and I saw her pressing all these buttons on her phone, and I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was texting her husband. I was like, you can do that? So I have lived through many cycles of evolution with the telephones. So let's look at this booklet a little bit, and I want to give you a little bit of insight. I asked my friend ChatGPT what it could tell me about phones in the 1940s. So here's what it says. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 1940, only 36% of U.S. households had a telephone. But by 1950, this figure had risen to 60%, and by 1960, over 80% of U.S. households had a telephone. And the first push-button telephone was introduced in 1963, and it was called the touch-tone phone. And then it became popular in the 1970s and 80s. And then I asked it what was home phone usage like in the mid-1940s. And they said back then, usage was still relatively low. Many households did not have a telephone, and those that did often shared a party line with other households. A party line was a single telephone line that was shared by multiple households. Each household had a unique ring pattern, but everyone on the line could hear each other's conversations. It wasn't until the 1950s that private lines became more common, allowing for more privacy during phone conversations. How many of you remember being able to listen in on other people's phone calls? I was a good kid, so it's not that I really did that, but you'd pick up the phone and someone would go, "I'm on it," and you could hear their conversation. That used to happen all the time. You'd pick up the phone and hear somebody else talking because they were in another part of the house, and they'd be like, I'm on the phone. I'll be off in a few minutes," and then hang up the phone. So here's our booklet that I got at the book sale called The Magic of Communication. It starts off with the headline, "The Telephone, a Magic Device." The telephone is a marvelous device. And I just have to tell you, I love the word marvelous because my Aunt Jane, my mom's sister, who I love with all my heart, always used to use the word marvelous. Like if she loved something that I had made, she would say, "Oh, Laurel, this is marvelous." And she would say it with such joy. So I love that this starts off with the word marvelous. The telephone is a marvelous device. It catches a spoken word and turns it like magic into something we cannot see or hear, which speeds along the wires or through space to another telephone. And in case I did not mention this does not have a date of publication, but in the back it has a chronology of the phone that ends in 1947. So I'm assuming this was printed in the late 1940s. So it catches a spoken word and turns it like magic into something we cannot see or hear, which speeds along the wires or through space to another telephone. There the magic is undone, and the hidden word comes forth just as the enchantments cast upon living persons in the old fairy stories finally were broken by charms, and everyone lived happily ever after. I love this writer already. Our modern fairy story is the story of electricity. The transmitter in your telephone casts a spell upon each word it catches, sending it noiselessly on its way. The receiver breaks the spell and a living word issues, bearing its message from a far distant speaker. Then the next page says, the telephone, mechanical vibrations. Your telephone rings. You answer it and the person calling speaks to you. It says speaks in italics. So you answer it and the person calling speaks to you. As you converse, you are faintly aware of the wind howling around the corner of your house and a streetcar rumbling past. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistles, and in another part of the house, a door slams. Those sounds are vibrations, mechanical vibrations that set airwaves to vibrating against your eardrum, which causes a message to be transmitted to your mind. Each of them has its own number of vibrations per second, and that is called frequency. The motion which you give to the molecules of air when you speak is not like that of the wind where a multitude of air molecules sweeps along. In a spoken word, or in any musical sound, the molecules dance back and forth. First, they advance, pushing against the eardrum, and then they retire and the membrane of the ear springs back. Over and over again this happens hundreds and even thousands of times every second. Okay, I didn't know that this was going to get this scientific. I might skip ahead. Not that science is bad, but I'm going to try and go on to some other part of this book that might be a little more compelling, although maybe you're fascinated by this. Okay, so it has a lot of information about how Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone and designed the phone and how telephones work, which I'm sure is fascinating, but I'm going to skip ahead to this next section, which talks about how the telephone networks work. So this is called the central office, telephone doorways. Your telephone line may be likened to a hallway leading from your telephone instrument to the central office. And there you have a door opening onto all the other hallways of speech. Along the hallway formed by the wires which connect your instrument to the central office and through this telephone door, you may converse with anyone else who also has a telephone, which was an incredibly cool development in its day. That was me, not the writer. For every conversation, 2 telephone doors must be opened, yours and that of the person whom you are calling. When you make a call from a dial telephone, your door, and often both doors, are opened. That is, the connections are made by ingeniously designed electrical equipment. Otherwise, either one or both doors are opened by telephone operators. Actually, at the central office, your hallway may be entered through a number of doors known as jacks. Remember telephone jacks that would plug into the wall? Of these, there are enough so that each operator at the switchboard can plug in one whenever someone asks to be connected to your telephone. And how many of you remember the character Lily Tomlin played? I don't remember her name, but it started with one ringy-dingy, and then she would take all the cords and plug them into the telephone system. So they're talking about the jacks. I thought they were talking about the jacks in the wall, but they're talking about the jacks in the main office of the telephone company. So these are the jacks they're talking about. Of these, there are enough so that each operator at the switchboard can plug into one whenever someone asks to be connected to your telephone. For the telephone calls which you make, there are still other jacks, one directly in front of each operator who handles your outgoing calls. Above each of these jacks is a small electric lamp. This lights and attracts the operator's attention when you take your receiver off its hook or when you dial the operator if you are using a dial telephone. In front of each operator are several lengths of paired wire cords, as they are called. By using one of these, the operator who answers your call can connect you directly to the line of anyone else whose telephone connects to that switchboard, or she can plug into a line leading to another switchboard. Next, the headline says, "Number, please." The operator wears her telephone set. This leaves her hands free to handle the cords and also the numerous little switches, which she calls listening keys, on the shelf before her. Her own telephone can be connected with any of these cords, but it is shut off from each cord by a separate key. All these keys or switches remain turned off unless she moves one and then holds it into the on position. When she sees the lamp above your jack glow, she picks up a cord and plugs in one end of it to the jack. Automatically, the light goes out. With her other hand, she then moves the key which connects her telephone with the cord she is using, and so she is able to answer you. If you live in a city which has just one telephone office, and all the calls are handled by operators, Every subscriber in that city has a jack within reach of your operator. These jacks are arranged in numerical order on panels in front of her. If, then, your call is to someone in that city, it takes her only an instant to plug the other end of the cord into the proper jack and send a ring down that line to call the other person to his telephone. A signal lamp close to the cord the operator is using lights when she plugs into the jack of the telephone you are calling. It stays lighted until your party takes his receiver off the hook so she knows at a glance whether or not he has answered your call. If the telephone you are calling is busy, the operator must know it to avoid interrupting. Special devices help her. She tests the telephone line of the person you want to reach before plugging in. With the tip of the plug, she touches the jack. If his line is busy, she knows it instantly, for she hears a clicking sound in her telephone. If she doesn't hear this warning, she pushes the plug all the way into the jack and rings to call him. The city in which you live may be served by 2 or 3 or more central offices. If the person whom you are calling is in a district served by another telephone office, your talk must follow a trunk line to that office. So your operator tests the trunk to the particular central office until she finds one that is not in use. Then she inserts the plug into this jack. In a moment, a sound tells her that the operator at the other end of the trunk in the other central office is ready to make the connection. Then your operator gives the number and the other operator connects the trunk with the line of the person you want. Okay, well, that was before my day for sure, but that was a lot of work. The next headline says, "Hum goes the dial tone." What the operator does by hand must be done by machinery if your call starts from a dial telephone. The central equipment is very complex. And I just have to say, we watch a lot of Andy Griffith in this house. It is one of my husband's shows that he likes to watch an episode or two when he gets home from work to decompress. And you know how Andy, it's that old-timey telephone and you have to pick it up and then talk to the operator. So I think those are the phones they're talking about there. But now we're going to the dial tone phones. So what the operator does by hand must be done by the machinery if your call starts from a dial telephone. This electrical equipment is very complex. That is, it has a great many parts. The parts themselves really are simple mechanisms, but they are so precisely designed and so ingeniously arranged to work together that they quickly and accurately follow the instructions which you send to them when you dial your telephone. That must have been so cool to be able to call without going through the operator. In the machine switching equipment of a dial telephone central office, there are several kinds of parts, but the most important is the electromagnet. This gives a pull when a current passes through its winding. The pull can be used for almost any purpose. It can close the switch so as to send current into other electromagnets and so make them work. Okay, this may be a little bit too scientific for me. I like the part of a woman plugging in cords. Okay, so I might skip through this part, but I will share this part. So the girl operator, because they were always girls, I guess, for some reason, or women, the girl operator would ask you, "Number, please." But the mechanism of the rotary dial phone cannot talk, so it sends you a tone to say it's ready for your instructions. And since it cannot hear, you dial the number. It is extremely important that you wait until you hear this hum before you start to dial. They're describing the dial tone. If you dial before you hear the dial tone, you'll get a wrong number or no number at all. As the dial rotates back to its original position, there is a click for each unit of the digit you dialed. 3 clicks for 3, 4 for 4, and so on. And you know what I'm contemplating right now? We don't hear a dial tone anymore unless we are using a dedicated line in the home. Oh my God, the new generations don't know what a dial tone is. Isn't that interesting? We have lived a lot of life, my friends. And now they're talking about long distance calling, which was just being developed then. So the headline here is the operator toll dialing. Within the next few years, Bell System long distance operators will be dialing calls directly and unassisted straight through to the call telephone, even though it be at the other side of the continent. A program is now being developed which will make it possible for long-distance operators everywhere to dial calls directly to any telephone in the country connected to the toll network. The first step will be the adoption of a nationwide numbering plan, which really must have been an undertaking. The Bell System has also announced its ultimate goal of making it possible for telephone users to dial anyone, anywhere in the United States, or perhaps anywhere in the world, just as simply and promptly as they now dial the telephone of a neighbor in the same town. This idea is many years away from realization, but the widespread extension of long-distance dialing by operators will be a major step toward the goal. And of course, we have lived our way into that dream, right? That's something we take for granted now. So in closing, what it says, there's still a lot more, but I'm going to skip around a little bit to the end. It says, at your service. The size and scope of the telephone system always at your service in America almost staggers the imagination. The number of telephones now exceeds 32 million, with 4/5 of them operated by Bell telephone companies, and the other fifth by some 5,900 independently owned connecting telephone companies and more than 60,000 rural lines. These telephones are interconnected by more than 120 million miles of wire and handle a total of about 175 million local and long-distance calls each day. Nearly 600,000 people are directly concerned with the furnishing of telephone service in the nation, and another 135,000 are engaged in telephone research and manufacture. But the telephone system, vast as it is, continues to expand and improve as telephone people find new ways of applying the magic of communication to provide more and better service than ever before. A marvelous device indeed, the telephone! Exclamation point. Isn't that interesting? I think about how much of the evolution of the phone system I have witnessed in my lifetime. Now, kids today won't even know what a dial tone is, or to call an operator, or carry a coin so that you could use a payphone to call your parents for a ride home. I always remember that, having a coin for a payphone to call to get a ride home. Back in the day. Or the idea of getting a busy signal, right? When somebody was on the line and you really wanted to call them. Did you ever have somebody break in on a phone call because it was an emergency? Or have an operator check if the phone was off the hook? I remember doing that. If a line was busy for a couple of hours, asking the operator if they could just check if the phone was off the hook or if somebody was on the line. Being able to call 411 and get a phone number that you needed, or call time. Yes, when you needed to set your clocks, we would call the number for the time. So back in the day, and when people answered their telephones, there was no screening because we did not have caller ID. And now we have these unimaginably powerful computers that we call phones that we carry around with us. When I think for the first few decades of my life, I went many, many places without a telephone, and now I wouldn't even think of leaving my house without my cell phone. So it's interesting to be able to look back and see how far we're traveling, especially when you think about what is being developed in this day and age with AI, and how so much will be changing in the next few years. There are going to be things developed we can't even imagine right now. I mean, when I used ChatGPT, when I first saw it a few months ago, I was dumbfounded by its power. I remember that moment a few months ago when my husband and I were sitting in the living room and we tried out ChatGPT for the first time. I was absolutely astounded, and astounded when I used Midjourney. Like, there are some things that are being developed now that are just as magical as how the telephone must have seemed all those years ago. So life is cool in that way, when we get to see how the evolution is happening in real time. And so thank you for letting me share this episode with you and take a little journey to discover how telephones have evolved within each of our lifetimes. Maybe your memories are different than mine, but I'm sure no matter what they are, you have also witnessed the evolution of how we use our telephones, which we don't call telephones anymore. I don't think we even call them cell phones anymore. We just call them phones, right? Because everything's a cell phone. Hardly anyone has a landline anymore. I still call them cell phones, though, because I'm from the Fred Flintstone era. And so with that, my beautiful friend, I say sweet dreams. I say thank you for letting me spend this time with you. I wish you a beautiful rest. I wish you blessings of love. I am so deeply grateful for the gift of you, and I look forward to connecting again with you soon. Thank you.